Hello, is Cambodian Education. I'm here with Mayo and T, who are both students in Japan. Can you both introduce yourself?
Okay,
So the
my
best friends, for those who don't know, apparently twins.
hi, my name is T. I'm 22 years old and I just recently graduated from Tokyo International University and I'm currently doing an internship in finance at Publicis Group North America.
I can't go over that. Okay, hello. My name is Mayo Ito. I'm a first year student at the University of Keio. I'm in the law faculty, but I major in the political science. And my background shows just a little bit about my background. I used to live in the United States. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for about just a little under 3 years. And after that, I moved to Shanghai and I lived there for around 4 years. So I can technically speak English, Japanese, and Chinese. Yes. And as of right now in university, I am the vice president of TEDx KOU. We're going to be holding an event. And I'm also a student project leader at Deloitte for a food loss project.
Okay. Where did you graduate for high school? In Japan or
Yes, in
abroad?
Japan.
Oh, okay. International school?
It's a little complicated. So I went to a all girls middle school and high school. It's like an escalator school, which is what they call it in Japan, which is you enter in middle school and technically no one can get in high school. So it's like everyone from middle school just gradually goes up to high school. And so a third of my whole entire grade was kind of like me. So they had like an international background where they lived abroad and studied English. So they only used English for their entrance exam.
Ah, okay. Is it a Japanese school?
Yes, all of the classes are taught in Japanese except for our English classes. So
You too, T has been to a Japanese school. Uh, Being now both in at university in Japan, do you think that your upbringing in another country, in other countries, has made you different from other students in Japan?
I think so. I think especially, well, it depends on your field or your major. I would say for me as a business major, there were a lot of things or concepts or even brands that I was exposed to in my previous classes at an international school that maybe some other students weren't necessarily exposed to. Being in an international university, I would say about half of the students are from other countries in Asia, and the rest are maybe from Western countries around Europe or North America. So a lot of them didn't have any knowledge of the Japanese corporate world. So that is something that going to an international school in Japan, I already had a bit of knowledge about and was able to bring into a lot of my business classes.
mm. As for me, I do have to say, education wise, I don't think it affected anything for my university courses or any lessons. And I say this simply because even though we did have a third of my class being from, all over the world, they've taken classes all over the world. Our education system was your very typical Japanese education where we were all kind of just like special troops to get into a good prestigious university, and that's just how it rolled. So all of our classes really, like constructed of like remembering 0 to 100 of every single subject out there: history, math, science, everything that was supposed to involve like creative thinking, discussions. None of that was really there. It was always just remembering 0 to 100. So, in a sense, you could say that it really did help me understand the world better because I just had a general knowledge of history rather than just like, listening to her. It's not like I got introduction to like corporate world or anything like that. So, only thing that probably I learned and helped me after university was learning it about like shady businesses that we learned during like I don't know home economics where they were like be aware. That's the only thing I actually helped me, I guess.
It can be surprising for people who, when I listen to you, you both have strong American accent when you speak English. You obviously have lived in different countries. Why did you choose to go to Japanese universities?
Well, for me, I had obviously the option of going to the United States or going back to my home country, France, or even somewhere else in Europe. But I think there was also like more of a financial aspect. I got a full ride scholarship to the university here. So it just seemed like the more logical step to make. I think that education at the end of the day is also strategic. And I was thinking, okay, well, would I go to a university here with a full ride and not have the financial pressure of maybe having to work a lot of hours outside of school? Or would I go to school in the United States and perhaps not get a full scholarship and be preoccupied with working and other things on top of my schooling and other hobbies or activities that I might have? So that was one of the big deciding factors, I think.
As for me, I was one of these students that really got the effects of COVID. So up until the my first year of high school, so as a freshman, a lot of my I guess education was like, okay, I'm going to try to apply to American universities. But throughout the end of my first year in high school, I kind of realized that it was going to be extremely hard, and my education at my school was way too difficult to go parallel with applying to universities and doing extracurricular stuff, doing SATs, and just doing everything in English that wasn't taught in school. And I would have to do that full time while also doing a Japanese education. And obviously there's much of a very small percentage that I would get into one of my dream schools. Therefore I would kind of have to apply simultaneously to a Japanese university, making I would have to study for two extremely different things.
Yes.
And I thought that it wasn't going to be sustainable, and I knew I was going to be not going to be able to do it anyway. So, and then COVID really hit, so it was kind of like a deciding factor as well. It was like, COVID, okay, it's going to be way too hard. I'm not even going to know if I can go to the US when the time where graduation is. So that was kind of my biggest, I guess, deciding factor. But I would also have to say that I chose a Japanese university, and especially my university, because even though I knew my, I guess, major and what I would be able to study would be limited and obviously not in the range of what I really wanted to study, I kind of knew that I would shine better, or I guess my abilities would be more appreciated in Japan than it would be in the US.
See, you kind of nodding to approve. Do you think it's the same for you?
In a way, yes. I think for me, like I'm not graduating from a big university here in Japan, but it's kind of like the philosophy of being a big fish in a small pond, I guess. Being in a university that was maybe slightly less academically challenging than it would have been if I had gone to like an Ivy League university, I had the opportunity to do a lot more outside of my classes, work on my NGO, work on different hobbies, have a social life, and actually use the network that college allows you to create a working like network of individuals that can help you develop other skills than what you learn in your courses. Because I also think that college is an important time in terms of self development, not only in terms of acquiring those credits and that academic knowledge.
You both mentioned that Nayo, for example, you are leading a TEDx program at KO and you work part time at Deloitte and of the Big Four, and you interning T at Publicis, and you did intern priorly in Japan and now you are in New York. Do you think that those opportunities came to you because you are in Japan?
Mm, I would have to say, if I were to be extremely humble, yes, definitely. Because one, if we were to, bring this exact circumstance to the United States, I would be extremely, extremely not in a better position because one, I don't go to an Ivy League school.
Yes.
My parents are not, they don't have any affiliates like whatsoever with the big four companies.
Mhm.
They're just very normal. I would say at best we're probably like upper middle class. So
Okay.
it's not the most ideal situation to grab those opportunities. If I were in the US, of course, those opportunities never would have come to me so easily. That is something I know for sure. And but at the same time, I think I would have. done, or I guess I would have shined in different areas if I were in the US. Maybe I might have been advocating more for Asian rights or, human rights more than I do now in Japan, because I feel like I would not reap the benefits of being Asian, female, growing up in Japan, not having anything to do with the US, by paper. So I would kind of have to fight for it, if it makes sense.
Okay.
For me, I would say yes and no. Because my university is not necessarily that influential, I did seek out a lot of opportunities by myself, just meeting people at events, at conferences, contacting recruiters, and that's basically how I got majority of my internships, if not all. But I do believe that, like Mayo said, there's a little bit less competition here. One important factor is that the intern culture is very small. In Publicis, for example, I was one of like two interns in the entire company when I joined. So there is the advantage that there's already no one really like looking for the positions that you're looking for, so it's kind of easier to get your foot into the door, and then once you're in, it's easier to get access to different roles or to talk to different people in the company, see if you can transfer things like that. So there definitely is a little bit less competition, but you still have to look for it and really be determined.
In Ivy League in the US, for example, or in top school in France or in England, you have this hustle culture. But even when you are a student, do you feel that here? Do you feel that hunger from Japanese students?
No. No. Maybe it's because I don't want to generalize, of course, but even with me being in a so-called prestigious school, not a lot of my friends, maybe it's because of their background, they're not hungry for anything, maybe.
Okay.
They're probably only hungry for girls, money, play, and drinks. That's kind of what I get here. Whilst a lot of my friends in the US that go to, good schools, they're very much hungry for opportunities. They're hungry for their education. They're hungry for like change in the world. That's kind of the way that their hunger, I guess. I don't know, in Japanese you would say "biktoru no muki ga chigau," which is just like the way the biktoru, which is like, alpha b, the way that their hunger is going is
Different.
completely
Different
different
direction.
directions. And I would say that it's kind of sad, but at the same time, it you know it makes it easier for those who do have hunger in those directions to shine more, because there's just less competition, as she said.
I would completely agree. I think it's more of, because there is the I would say the hunger comes at a different time than it does in different countries. Here the hunger is very much when you're in Kosan, the last year of high school, there's a big pressure to get into a good school, a good university. And then after that, I think that a lot of Japanese students get a huge sense of security because there isn't a huge unemployment rate here. So everyone pretty much knows, okay, well, I'm gonna get a job. Nobody is scared of being unemployed,
Oh
which I
yeah.
wouldn't say is the case in a country like
Oh yeah,
France. So
for
it's
sure.
pretty much, that, well, you're gonna be at least at an average level corporate job. You're not gonna be starving basically. So there isn't that huge need for even a hustle
Oh
culture.
yeah, for sure. On
Uh,
top of that, yeah.
do you think that the price of schooling also make it's playing a role
Oh.
in that
Mm-hmm.
culture? Because
Mm.
if you have to invest approximately 50,000 US dollar a year per school, and even at KU around 10,000 a year, it's a big
Oh
difference.
yeah, for sure. I have to say that education comes with a cost,
Mhm.
and the cost, even though you say education comes with a cost, in parentheses, I feel like the word connection, network, status is also combined. So
Yes.
in Japan, happily and luckily, a lot of the universities, the price is not so different, whether it's a
Mhm.
national school or a private school, they're generally the same. So, in that sense, there's not much of a different starting point, if that makes sense. But
Mhm.
as for the US, you're going to have to fight for that starting point in the first place.
Mhm.
So, to get there, there's much more pressure on the family in the first place, because they're, paying for like 50K, you know, and but if you paid that much, and obviously as a non-working student, there's much more that's on the line for you
Yes.
compared to there's technically nothing on the line for you, which is why a lot of my friends, including me, it's not much. I don't struggle much to think, I'm not feeling too well, I'm probably going to skip this class. That kind of thought would probably never come to me if I was going to an Ivy League school,
Mhm.
especially with my parents' income and being, Asian. I
Yes.
would probably be half sick, half dead, and I would probably go to school. But as for Japan, I wouldn't, and I don't think the majority would try.
Mm.
Be Asian American and be African descent from France in Japan. How is your experience?
Mm, I think you've got much
That's a
more to
broad
say.
question. I don't know. I think my experience is particular because I did grow up here, so I managed to kind of assimilate in a way that I kind of understand now how Japanese people work and how to
Hmm.
communicate, whether verbally or through like body language, how to kind of read between the lines. And I think that's been really, really, really important when working in the Japanese corporate world. Even in international companies, you have to know how it works. And that is something that I think a lot of international students miss when they come here, whether they are black or white or Asians from other countries. There's no class to teach you how to
Mm. Like
talk to
social
seniors,
cues.
exactly how, for example, I in my last year of university, I went to a lot of networking events. There's a special way to network in Japan that you don't net like isn't the same as networking in the United States. You're less forward, you might have to grab the business cards in a certain way. So there's a lot of things that I would say are kind of necessary to survive in the Japanese corporate world. It's not that it's harder or easier, it's just completely different.
Mm.
And I think that there should be more emphasis on that
Oh
when it
yeah.
comes to international schools, for sure.
As for me, I would have to say with just a grain of salt, but she's probably had it much more harder than, me, obviously with so much aspects. But as for me, I would have to say that for personal relationships, I have struggled being, I'm not Asian American, but I would say I do have more American culture in my blood. But I say personal relationship wise, it's because kind of the same reasons. I can't read Japanese social cues. That was my biggest concern when I entered a Japanese girls' school because, being girls and having a little community and how they were cliquey, it's not how I imagined. And one of like, this is like a kind of a very trivial thing, but when I was the first time I got into the middle school and we had to choose our student council, or I guess the class president. It's not a big deal, but since we don't know each other, we kind of just had to do like a very brief introduction of each other. And so everyone just stands up one by one and goes, "Hi, my name is blah blah blah. I lived in blah blah blah." And it's like, it's done for. And obviously, everyone being them, they knew that if they said one thing wrong, they would be selected as the class president, which they didn't want to do. Me being me, I was very straightforward. So I said, "Hi, my name's Maya. I used to live in America and China. Not really good with Japanese. I don't want to be class president." And obviously, what happened was I became class president by vote. you know, I mean, this is kind of exaggerating, but it is the truth. But in that sense, it's kind of like I was taught in both the US and China to say what I want, say what I don't want, be vocal about it because no one's going to read that for you. If you want it, you're going to have to go get it by yourself. No one's going to be giving you a silver platter and going, "Here you go." And that was kind of how I was raised. Not raised, but I guess that was my environment. So being put in a Japanese environment with totally social cues based off of Japanese culture, I was like, "Oh, this is how we roll." And since I obviously have Japanese parents and I did have Japanese friends, it was easier for me to grasp those cues, but it did take me, I would say, a solid 3 4 years, and I think I'm still learning the social cues even as a Japanese person. And for that, I would say personally, or personal relation wise, I would have to say being Asian American would have been it's a little hard. But as for like non personal, more like business, more high profile relations, me being Asian American has really had much more benefit
Mm.
because one, they expect me not to understand Japanese social cues in the first place. So even if I make a subtle mistake, whether that be I give them my business card in a non-formal way, they'll be like, "Ah, そうだよね。帰国子女だもんね." They'll say something like that, which is 帰国子女 kind of translates to returnee, which isn't really like full English, but it just means that you grew up in a different country and you came back to Japan and your parents are both Japanese. That's kind of what it means. But the term kikokushijo is also it's a protective word. They kind of use it as like a cushion word. So it's like
Yeah.
if I mess something up, they'll say, "Oh, because you're
It's okay.
kikokushijo." Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if I'm vocal, they'll be like, "Ah, やっぱり kikokushijo って違うんだね. You have your own opinion. It's because you're kikokushijo." I mean,
Yeah.
that's not really the truth, but in a sense, they'll be more like open-minded about your mistakes, and they'll overly like look at your like accomplishments because you're a returnee. And it's like I've heard from a lot of people that if you're a returnee, it's much easier to get into a university or high corporate jobs because a there's the underlying factor that you can speak
English.
English, and then two, you have a global mindset. Three, you're a little more non to like in the box, you can think outside of the box. So I'd have to say, as much as I do reap the benefits, it kind of gives a personal blow sometimes. It's like, oh, I'm not Japanese, maybe. It gives me the sense of like an identity crisis. So in that sense, it has been a bit hard, but not too hard.
A lot of students now outside Asia are attracted because of the influence of maybe Korean drama, Japanese anime, of the and the global influence of China, for example, on the global scene. And they now learning massively Mandarin Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. And obviously, a lot of them want to come and study in Asia and particularly in Japan. Do you have some kind of advice for them, some kind of guidance, or do they need some kind of guidance prior to going to those countries? You lived in two Asian countries now. Tea is the same for you. You live in in Asian countries. You both speak Asian languages. So, do you have like something to say about that? That is it a trend? Is it the impact of globalization? How does it in your generation impacting those you in your job perspective? You say that you have some kind of advantage here, but if they are global, a lot of people coming to Japan, will you still have that advantage?
Yes. My thing is, I thought about this a lot because in my school we have a lot of exchange students coming to Japan for 4 months to a year, from United States, from Europe. And I think that one thing that I always try to tell them, because I tend to become friends with a lot of new students, is just look at Japan as if you would look at your own country. It's
Exactly.
so easy for us to see the flaws and the realities of our own countries because we don't fantasize about
The
where we don't
romanticization.
romanticize it. The problem is that a lot of you've come to Asia with this idea that comes from Korean drama, that comes from anime, that comes from manga, and they almost trivialize the real issues that real citizens are dealing with. And I think that kind of puts a negative image of the foreigners who come here because they don't take life here seriously at all.
Oh yeah, for
And so
sure.
the reason why I say yes, we would still have those advantages is because a lot of them are simply unable to pursue high positions here because they kind of come here and have fun, and then they realize, oh, this is actually a real country with real issues, and
Yeah,
then they're like
for sure.
scared, and then they go back home.
Yeah.
So although it's a good experience and it's fun and you get to learn some cultural things, you don't actually learn any real Japanese values during that time. And that's something that I wish people or schools or programs emphasize more. In a sense, it's not that you have to come to Japan and be super serious, but I think that it's a bit damaging to have those stereotypes that Japan is all fun and games,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's just like everything is so safe and perfect, because that's simply not the reality. It's a country like any other country with its amazing positive aspects and its negative aspects. So I do think that it would be interesting to kind of switch the narrative of exchanges when it comes to Asian nations, to have, you know, to put different things at the forefront than just anime and manga.
Mm. As for me, it's literally the same opinion as well. But there's one thing that I would like to, I guess, not say, but I'd like to, one word from a Japanese person by passport. I would have to say that as much as I understand, romanticizing every little aspect, I've seen so many YouTubers like romanticize literally like a convenience store, which is like I get it because I myself going to Europe on trips, I do romanticize all of the architecture, the bread, the food, the coffee. It's really easy to romanticize because of course we want to see the better things in a better light and it's I think it's human nature, but the bad thing about it is as she said, you have to look at any other country the way you look at your own country, unless your country is like in war or like in extreme conditions. You should look at each country the way you do as your own, because one issue that I see a lot with a lot of the, I don't like to say foreigners, but I guess foreign people in Japan, it's that when, because their, I guess, expectations or the way they view Japan is so bubbly and it's so saturated, what they see is like the best version, and the moment one thing pops and they see like a loophole or whether it's a mole, it's, they go ballistic. And when I mean by ballistic, it's not that they're going to throw a fit, it's just that the only opinion that they'll say is, oh my god, Japan is like so blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
and they'll start complaining, which is I totally understand, but at the same time, you're talking as if, you know, you're here and you're taking all of this every single day. I understand, but at the same time, you know, it's the same for your country. So you can't just be like Japan is so blah blah. No, it's like every country, anywhere, any school, any office, anywhere has their good points and bad points. You can't just take either point and say Japan is this. So I feel like when you're coming to Japan or any other country, you need to, of course, it's better to romanticize because, you're probably going to get the best of experiences here. If you romanticize about, I don't know, anime, then you could go, sightseeing your favorite anime spots, then that would be nice. You could, like, obviously romanticize convenience stores, Japanese food, that would be nice. But to advance, like to romanticize a culture and social cues that you feel like you would have gotten here, that's not right. And I think it's really commonly known that a lot of Asian countries are very white. I guess it's like we call it Hakujin Shijoshugi, which is just like we're very much, how do we say it? It's like
Catering
catering
to
to white
white people.
standards.
Yeah.
And it's very known that Asian countries have very white beauty standards as well. And a lot of the, I wouldn't like to categorize by saying white people, but a lot of the, I guess, European and American people that come to Japan, they think that they're going to be appreciated or they're going to be wowed because they're from those countries and they're technically white, and they might be, subjectively better looking because those are the standards. But you shouldn't come with that mindset in the first place, and you shouldn't think it's gonna be okay to do anything reckless or of course break the law here because you're like here as like an exchange student.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. I've heard a lot of stories from my friends hear from exchange students that they'll just smoke weed walking around town. Like that's not how it rolls. And I understand that you feel like Japan is really safe. We're not too vocal about what you do wrong, but you do have to respect that every country's culture. And I think it doesn't take two brains to think of what a culture is kind of like. You'll probably guess. Like you can walk through the streets and you can probably tell that Japanese people aren't too loud when they're talking on their phone. You're probably going to realize that Japanese people don't swear that much. You'll realize that they'll be really apologizing of anything that they do. You'll see that maybe with 1 or 2 days walking around town. And if you can grasp those little things and like just, put them on the back of your mind, then you'll be a better person here and you'll also be a better person for us and for us we'll be able to communicate better. So it's you should always have the mindset that we're all the same anyway. So come here with a flat mindset, come here with expectations, but also expect the worst because you don't understand.
Realistic.
Yeah.
Just be
Be
realistic.
realistic. Yeah.
I have a question, Mayo, for you
Mhm.
because you did study at something that is not that usual anymore. You
Mhm.
study at the all girls school
Yeah.
in Japan.
Mhm.
What are the aim of the school and why parents are choosing this kind of
Hmm.
school? And what was your experience at that school?
Okay, so this is a really I must say that I'm not an expert, so please take
Mhm.
my, point of view with a grain of salt. I do believe that by study, I think this was like a study conducted in Australia, which is that co-ed schools do they do worse when it comes academically testing. So like different so like boys schools and girls schools, just only one gender in one school, they typically rank better when it comes to academic standards. This is said to be because there's not much romance going on and a lot of, because we're at that age where puberty hits us and a lot of things change. Being with just the same gender kind of helps sometimes go through those puberty issues alone, because of course I don't want to get too deep here, but like girls start their period around the age of getting into middle school. That's for Japan at least. So it's easier to deal with those issues when you're in a girls school with only teachers that understand girl issues, I guess.
In that school, all the teachers are women.
No,
Okay.
but the majority is women, or they're
Mhm.
like they're female teachers, I guess.
Okay.
But I do have to say that it's, yeah, so for as I went for the Australian study, I believe, because Australia is one of the few countries, like European countries, non-Asian countries, that actually have a lot of only girls schools and only boys schools. But as for Japan and as for my school, a lot of the top schools, consider like private schools in Japan, they're usually either boys schools or girls schools, because we have a term called gosanke, which is a term used for all girls. It's like a girls school that top rank 3 academically, and this standard is used. So it's like what from what point of view are they so high? It's technically because they have the most graduates that go to the top universities in Japan. That's kind of how they, that's kind of their standard or standardization. But it's kind of, it's not really something that a lot of parents go so far into thinking it's like, oh my god, we need to choose a girls' school. It has to be. It's not like that. It's just that a lot of the higher ranking schools just tend to be either girls' schools or boys' schools. And for my school, it's kind of the same thing, because my school, as for my grade, my graduate class, we actually had one of the best. We had the most graduates that went to KO,
Oh, okay.
excluding the KO high schools
Wow.
that they have.
Very
So
interesting.
yes, and for Waseda as well, we had about 100 students go, maybe 100, or at least
Wow,
100
it's a lot.
passed.
Yes.
But there's only 200 something students in my grade, so
Yeah.
that says a lot. But I do have to say, in a girls' school, there's always going to be a pros and a cons. But I personally, I feel like I had a better experience compared to maybe a lot of people. But I think a lot has to do with the fact that we had a lot more students that were kikokushijo, meaning a lot of the students had different backgrounds coming here. So everyone was more open-minded in the first place. So we were able to like go through that together. So in the first year, it's like this is really complicated, but first 3 years of middle school, so like up until the end of middle school, there's 5 classes in each grade. 3 classes will have returnees, which is kikokushijo, so like people that have had international backgrounds, and then the remaining two, they don't have any students like that, but they rotate every single year, so you can always, there's always a chance that you'll be with a returnee. And I personally remember when I was in my second year of middle school, a really good friend of mine that I think she sat next to me or behind me. I think it was behind me. She was already good at English, but me speaking English to her every day is just like talking one-sidedly. She was able to improve her English, and she always told me, and not just her, but a lot of my friends that are non-returnees have told me that their point of view has widened because of maybe not my knowledge, but things that I know because I have lived abroad or because I have interest in certain fields that maybe only international student kids kind of get. So in
So
that sense, it's
you
good.
both learning from each
Yes,
other
yeah.
by interaction.
Interaction wise, it's very different from your typical girls' school because we all had very different backgrounds in the first place. So there was really much to share. And I feel like it would have been the same case if it was a boys and a girls school because boys have different thoughts and views. Girls also have different thoughts and views. So I would it's really weird to say if I would say that the we returnees substituted boys, but I would have to say that different thoughts and different cultures you know, really kind of merged together in a really nice way. So, as for my school, only my school speaking, I would say that the experience was great. Education was not the best, but experience wise, really nice.
T, you went to an international school in Japan for high school. So yours, you also have a specific experience of schooling in Japan. What can you say about that experience, having to study in Japan in an international school with both Japanese and foreign youth?
I'd say on kind of surface level, it was similar to Mayo's experience in the way that there were a lot of Japanese students who were born and raised in Japan, and then there were international students from basically all over the world, even really, really small countries. So, in that sense, you are really, really exposed to a lot of different ideas. And especially because it was a school that really valued the ideas of diversity and leadership, we would always have some sort of like discussions, or we had what we call town halls, which I was one of the people who were frequently leading those discussions, where we would talk about different problems going on around the world. Let's say like economic crisis in Venezuela, or we could talk about Black History Month, things like that. So you definitely are more prepared to later on go to, let's say, a university in the United States or to another international environment, or whatever you want to do that isn't necessarily in Japan. I think one thing that was kind of difficult, not necessarily for me, but I could see for the Japanese students, for example, is that because we all come from really different middle schools and really different academic environments, the starting level is not the same at all. So, for example, a lot of Asian students were very, very prepared when it came to science and math. I couldn't say the same coming from a French educational background. A lot of us were at varying levels in English, but the education was all in English. So I'd say that was more of a disadvantage for a lot of the Japanese students. But I do think that for a school in Asia where you usually your opinion as a student is not necessarily as valued, they did make a lot of effort so that we would actually feel a sense of responsibility in our education, as in we often had like voting systems for different things, and you can also choose your topics when it comes to the IB International Baccalaureate. So you kind of have this big pressure in a way, but at the same time, it's everything is up to you. So if you take a subject and you don't like it or something, you make a decision when it comes to your clubs or student union or town hall, then you know that you at the end of the day made the choice. So you can't blame it on the teacher, can't blame it on your parents. And I think that's good in terms of building independence, and it definitely prepared me for college in the sense that I was kind of more mature in my education when it came to college and more independent.
What I noticed with both of you background is that basically you kind of privilege
Oh
in a
yeah, for
sense.
sure.
You're both trilingual, you both live in different countries, You both really smart, intelligent, and beautiful, of course. Um, but the idea that we have of Japan is like young girls, especially like you, they are not expecting that much, both from school and especially because they are not. They know that they won't be able to have those great careers that we can see women having abroad. Are you agreeing with that, or is it a myth?
I would have to say I would like to agree, but at the same time, I wouldn't, which
Mm-hmm.
is a bit of a complicated answer. But I would have to say, because I've been in contact with a lot of people, obviously both women and male, that are in high positions. They
Mm-hmm.
have great careers, but they're also, mothers and fathers. They're
Mm-hmm.
also partners. They're also, a girlfriend or a boyfriend.
Yeah.
It's really been great seeing that as like growing up. So I know that there's always much more options.
Mm-hmm.
There's like so many more options where you can, in just like future wise, you could become a housewife, even though it's a controversial topic. You can always be a housewife. You can also be a work mom. You can also run your own business. You can also be a stay-at-home dad. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many ways of what you can be, and it doesn't have to be limited to your assigned gender or what you identify as or whether your sexuality is.
Mm-hmm.
I think those things really don't matter in this time of age. They
In
shouldn't.
Japan?
No, in the world wise, it shouldn't
Okay.
matter. But in Japan, the term "it shouldn't matter" doesn't really apply because
Mm.
it only matters.
Mm-hmm.
Being a girl, you're gonna be treated like a girl. Meaning that when I say girl, they're gonna treat you like you can't really do much. You're much suited to do very, you know, tedious tasks. You're gonna do Excel worksheets, you're gonna do, PowerPoints
Office,
and
basic
office
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 jobs.
jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what you're expected of. That was kind of like 20 years ago. I think that was applied when my mom was during her applying to jobs, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say which company, but at this point I still don't like this company because of this. Is that my mom was rejected an offer, or rejected I guess even an application, because they said, quote unquote, we do not hire women at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So in the sense, I would have to say that that kind of culture has definitely gone away.
Oh, okay.
I would say to a bare minimum. I think
Mm-hmm.
we've got a little bit closer to the global standards.
Okay.
But however, there's much debate to talk about, because, for instance, there was a big scandal where, in I think it was a medical university or medical,
Oh, I remember that
yeah.
scandal.
So it's that much more girls were supposed to be passed students,
Mm-hmm.
but they chose not to pass those girls because there weren't enough guys to be passed. So they
Yeah.
decided to, give those passed girls seats to guys that weren't even qualified for that
Mm-hmm.
spot. That says a lot about Japanese culture, meaning
Which
that
was
they
the
won't.
to that
Tokyo
Tokyo
Medical
Medical
University.
University. And with this being said, I think this really shows how Japanese society views gender roles. It's that on the surface level, they won't do anything because they can't by law.
Mm-hmm.
And they will be heavily criticized by those who are against those things. However, in the back, they're still manipulating things to go in their favor. Meaning boys, men will be in a more superior rank. And I feel like this is a really big issue, but at the same time, girls my age don't really ask for change. And I
Oh,
say this
okay.
simply because I'm saying this primarily of Japanese girls, but I say this because Japanese living standards are not that bad.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
One. And another one, however, this is kind of, I'm going to be contradicting myself, which is sotaiteki hinkon, which is, I think it's called relative poverty rate in Japan, is extremely high. It's
Okay.
very high. There's 1 in 7 kids are, struggling from it. So they're not in extreme poverty, but they're at least suffering from relative poverty. So with that being said, this is going to be a little weird, but Japanese people, a lot of Japanese people, they're not living on the edge. Not a lot of people are compared to a lot of countries.
Mm.
And a lot of the girls, especially those around me, at least those girls walking around Shibuya,
Mm.
So
they're not
upper
They don't
class.
feel
upper
it.
class, I
Yeah.
guess even middle class.
Mm.
They know that, and honestly, if they can get married to a somewhat corporate working job husband, their life is going to be fine.
Mm.
Okay.
And it's like not a lot of their desires are based off of getting a good job or a high
Mm.
career. I want to get a Nobel Peace Prize. That's not what they aim for in life. That's not their life goal. A lot of their life goals are very much private. They're more on their I guess like inner
Kodomo.
circle.
And
It's like
yeah.
I want to have kids. I want to be able to buy a couple of handbags.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I wouldn't like to generalize, but a
Mm.
lot of the people, especially without a very high education or maybe just middle education, think about. So it's very different about what girls in Japan want anyway. So it's very hard to compare
Mm.
about the global standards. If you ask an American kid or an American girl, they would say completely different answers.
Yeah.
They'll probably say, I want to be the president of the United States. If you ask Japanese girls the same age, they'll probably say, I want to be a princess. I want to be a housewife.
Mm.
Mm.
But that's what they're socialized to do.
Yeah,
So we
exactly.
can't really judge them personally.
Yes.
That's how society
He has
teaches
formed
women
them.
to
Yeah.
be.
Does that mean that for you, for example, ambitious young women, Japanese and engaging in Japan, that is actually opening more doors for them, or they can open more doors for themselves if
Yes
you have
and
less
no.
ambitious young women?
Yes and no, because one of the most like it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before when it comes to, for example, I have a NGO focusing on teaching young Japanese youth about gender inequality and kind of how to tackle society in a way, how to make your voice known. And also, because it's such a taboo topic, they don't even necessarily think about it. If you ask the regular Japanese girl, do you think that there is gender inequality in this country, they'll probably tell you no, even if the statistics show you completely different, and that Japan is actually ranking among some of the countries in
Worst.
war, or countries that stereotypically everybody knows that are doing really bad in terms of gender equality. Countries in the Middle East, countries in Africa, countries in Southeast Asia. But because the country is so developed economically, it's really hard to notice that there is actually big inequalities, gender pay gap, glass ceiling, etc. And I think that the only young women who are really noticing that are the kikoku, like returnees who live in America and have actually seen something different. If you've never seen something different, you can't even
Yeah.
imagine it. So, for
Mm.
example, I had the opportunity to work with ladies from ICU, International Christian University, ladies who go to Waseda, who go to Todai and are studying gender there. And their vision is completely different, and their ambition is completely different than the regular Japanese girl. But the problem is that even if there are a few very ambitious young women, because we are so little, once we do enter the workforce, we can't really make change. Yes, we might be able to individually attain high positions, become CEOs or CFOs, or work in our desired fields, but it's hard to say whether that will actually be impactful in terms of hiring more women, developing fields. For example, in STEM, there are very few young women working
The
in STEM
issue
fields.
of STEM and women is an issue everywhere, I guess.
But I
Yes,
think
but
it's
Japan is one of
worse.
the best countries for
This.
STEM.
Mhm.
So if we consider it, it's like, okay, let's say France, for example. France is not one of the highest ranking countries in terms of STEM,
Yes.
but the equality is still higher than Japan. Japan has one of the highest rates of graduates in STEM fields, and yet almost no women. So it's kind of like you have to compare it in a quantitative manner more than a
So
qualitative manner.
let's imagine I'm a youth in France, and I'm a girl. I identify as girl, and I want to come to Japan. Um, and I want to become engineer, IT engineer. Would you advise me to
Difficult.
come? How is it going to be difficult? Do I need help? Do I need to start learning Japanese? What do I need? Do I need to save?
Um,
Um,
I would have to say, um, Japan is a very, it's called a gakurik shakai. This is what we call a Japanese society, which is, I don't know how to say this, but it's like a lot of your worth is based off of your academic background and academic
mhm.
achievements. Therefore, in Japan, it doesn't really matter who you are. If you get good grades, you are a graduate of a great school, a prestigious one, you will be respected. You will be. That is something that I have to say. But it is going to be harder for you to earn that respect personally off of those application forms because you're one, female, and two, you are not even
Foreigner.
Japanese.
Mm.
Mhm.
Those two things are going to start minusing your respectable. If your respected, I guess, point was 100%, it would become 80% the moment you're not even Japanese.
Mhm.
And then it would go back to maybe, 70% because you're female.
Okay.
So it's like, even though we all know you're a respectable female as a, STEM subject engineering student,
Mhm.
people will never see you the same.
You'll have to
Okay.
go above and beyond
So
Yes.
for your
that means that you
accomplishments.
have the glass ceiling because you're a woman, and you have some kind of bamboo ceiling if you're coming from
Yes.
outside Japan and Asian,
Hmm.
and you have like so you can't reach a high
Oh no.
position.
You can, but it's, like one in a
It's
million.
a one in a
So,
million. I
Okay.
think we can give the example of the astronaut, Japanese astronaut Mukai Chiaki-san. She was the
Mm-hmm.
first Japanese, astronaut. She is highly, hi- she is one of the most highly respected ladies, professional people in Japan. But
Mm-hmm.
I must say, it must have took her a long way to get here, and she would not have earned the same amount of respect if she was an engineering student or an
Mm-hmm.
engineer. She earned the respect because, one, the term astronaut and as a profession is extremely hard in the
Ah,
first
okay.
place. So it's like you have to earn a status or a title that goes above and beyond of anything else. If
Okay.
you're a prime minister, everyone's going to respect you anyway
Mm-hmm.
because the title prime
It's
minister goes above anything. They don't care who
mm-hmm.
you are, what you like, what you do.
yeah.
It's the fact that you're a prime minister that speaks words for itself.
Okay.
So in that sense, Japan, they're never gonna really, they're not gonna push you down because you're some sort of background or your gender is whatever. But they won't
Lift you
especially
up
lift
either.
you up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we have to leave, we have such a lovely time in this place, and that this woman need to go back home. We have to respect that,
Yes.
and she's working really hard. Do you have something to say to about Japanese education or Japanese student or Japan in general, or people wanting to come to Japan in regard to education? What we should aim for your generation, for example, in Japanese, why not? Or in English,
Mm,
up to you to conclude this
I
beautiful
go.
exchange.
Okay, so I'll go both English and Japanese. So
Okay.
English wise, so I'd say for my English speakers, as if I have fans, but
You don't know, you don't know,
for
Ayo.
my English speakers, I would have to say, as a Japanese person having lived in the United States and China, I would have to say, Japan is a very nice country. I'm not gonna, that's something that I will always admit, and I have a love for Japan, and I always will. But I do have to say that every country has its flaws. And a lot of the flaws that Japan has as of right now and that what we are facing, it's not normal considered globally. And
Mhm.
considering that we are, I don't like this term, but developed country, it's sometimes extremely embarrassing having to explain little things such as our phones. When we're taking a picture, as you can see, if I were to take a picture on my iPhone, even if I have muted my notifications, the sound will goes on. we are the only two countries in the world that have this law. What do you mean law, right? Korea and Japan are the only countries that have this. You have to have the shutter sound on any phone that is sold in Japan. This is most embarrassing enough because we have people taking photos of random girls under skirts. They're taking inappropriate photos of inappropriate times. That's an issue. That's why we have a law. For you to sell these phones without one would be an issue. And that is kind of really sad. And we have a lot of issues like this. And if you romanticize Japan, you idealize Japan, and you love Japanese culture, it's probably going to hurt to even try to understand. But that is the reality. But it's the same for a lot of countries. We all have realities that are not as ideal. And it's really sad, but I would love that you would come to Japan with an open mind and come here with your expectations in hand. But on the other hand, I would also like that you look at Japan with a grain of salt, with a realistic expectation, and that understand that Japan has its own flaws. But I would just have to say, Japan is probably never going to be a destination spot. As for me, it will always be like a stepping stone. And not in a way that I will push Japan down, but I mean it will be a milestone. And I feel like, as not just a Japanese person, it's really important to understand your country, your culture, and your background, and to learn the flaws and the goods of a country, that so that you can just be a more open-minded person. So I think I will always have love for Japan, but I will always have a critical eye for Japan as well.
Okay.
Yes, and for Japanese, 日本語で少し言うとしましたら、そんな言うことはないんですけれども、日本は国としてすごく素晴らしい国ですし、多くの日本人はその日本は安全で他の国に比べると綺麗だったりっていうような、そういう表面的なことにとらわれがちだとは思うのですが、やっぱり外に一回出てみないと日本がどういう現状に置かれているのかっていうことには気づけないのは絶対にあると思います。で、それに気づけないことも幸せでもあり、気づかないことによって自分の人生は楽には絶対になるとは思います。だけど、そろそろその変革っていうか変化が必要な時期にはなっていて、それを誰が主導で変化を起こすのかっていうところになった時に、自分がその変革を起こす人になるのか、あるいは関係ない、60歳の、日本人の男性で女性のことなんか一切気にしてないような方にそういう変革を求めるのかっていうところになった場合には考え直すべきだと思います。
私も一言言うんですけど、本当にフランスとかヨーロッパの国から来ると、日本の教育は本当にいろんな特別なところがあると思うので、1年間だけでも本当に日本に来て、自分の意見とか自分の世界が変わる感じな教育を経験できると思うので、ぜひ来てください。I'm like a president.
Okay.
Thank you, girls.